Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Scott Schell and I'm a specialist in the Germanic languages. I have a bachelor's degree in German, a master's degree in linguistics, and a PhD in Germanic linguistics from the University of California, Berkeley. And in today's video, what I would like to talk to you about is the Ribe Skull Fragment. There are several videos out there on the Ribe Skull Fragment, except there are a couple of things that are floating around that concerning this fragment which are actually not true. And that is what sort of prompted me to do this video, because I had actually done extensive research on this inscription in my dissertation and in the forthcoming book that I'm putting out for Peter Lang, which will most likely be available by the end of this month. So let's go ahead and just start from the top. This fragment was found in 1973 in Ribe, Denmark, and it is dated to about 725 CE. So this is a piece of a cranium that was found, and many scholars believe that it is apotropaic, that the intention was to sort of heal someone. That does seem plausible. In fact, it's probably the reason for this this particular runic object. But the first thing that I wanted to clear up is that you'll notice that in this cranium, you'll see a hole there. Now, there are many people, like I said before, who say that this particular fragment might have been used as an amulet, as in an amulet that someone had hung around their neck, for example. This is completely false. And I'm going to go ahead and read you a passage from an article that actually discusses this. There's an article out there which where the authors actually performed microscopic analysis on this particular hole to see if there was any sort of polish or cord wear, and there just simply isn't any. So here is that passage right here, so you have it quoted in full. It can, in fact, be rejected that the skull fragment was worn by someone as a kind of amulet hanging from the bored hole. High magnifications of the upper edge of the hole show a slight upward curling of the lamina externa, and there is no indication of wear or polishing as a result of the passage of a cord through the hole. So, I don't usually say, share all of these videos with people, spread all this information, but this is one of those cases where you'd be doing a lot of people a favor if you could even just spread that passage around, just to let everybody know that this was not worn as an amulet. So, now that that's out of the way, you might say, well, why is the hole there? I do have an explanation for that that's coming up in just a bit, towards the middle end of the video. So the first thing that I wanted to get out of the way here is that this is not entirely 100% a Younger Futhark inscription. The majority of the language does display Old Norse. There are a couple of archaisms throughout, but for the most part, it is about 80% Younger Futhark and about 20% Elder Futhark. So this is actually a transitional inscription, right? It's very old, but just to show you that it is Old Norse, mostly, as far as the language is concerned, you'll see that the W has disappeared in front of the O, for example, in Odin's name. But look at some of the runes. You'll see that there's actually an M rune that's being used from the Elder Futhark and not the Younger Futhark. You will also see that there is an H rune there, the Hagalaz rune or the Hagel rune, which is being used as a single barred H rune and not like the star-shaped H rune that we find later. So again, this is a very old inscription, and it's sort of dipping into both territories as far as it being a part of the Younger system or the Elder system, but phonologically speaking, yes, this inscription is predominantly Old Norse. So I'm going to go ahead and read you a normalized transcription of this runic object, and we're going to go ahead and talk about some of the words on the skull fragment. Over, out Oden, out Hotir, Hjalt Boreas Gider, Daima Verki, out Werk Unen, Bor. So there are actually quite a few scholars out there who have different translations for this inscription. There are all kinds of problems when it comes to the actual translation. The transcription is pretty much constant, but there are, yet again, several other people out there who have even proposed alternate transcriptions. But in this video, I'm going to go ahead and talk about the transcription that I see and I have rendered or adopted. And I'm going to go ahead and give you a translation of this skull fragment. The first word that I want to discuss is dwarf. You might think that this is relatively simple, but when you look at it next to the lexeme unen, it becomes a little problematic. So there are several scholars out there, for example, who have read this as a female dwarf, and they look at it as bindrune, and they compare it to the female form Asunya, which is a goddess. It's the female form of like one of the Aesir gods. It's the female goddess, and Apunya, which is like a female ape, and then we also have Vargunya, which is literally a female warg, right, like a she-wolf, if you will. Like I said, this basically comes from reading the next lexeme as something different other than unen, in which case I do believe that unen makes perfect sense. But let's go ahead and discuss this female dwarf concept real quick. Take note that there is absolutely no attestation whatsoever of a female dwarf in the mythic records. So there are attestations of female dwarves later on in the folkloric traditions, but not in the early mythic records. So for some of you, because I'm sure some of you are going to think about this very literally and say, well, Scott, if you have male dwarves, how is it that they reproduce? I'll ask you, well, how is it that male dwarves somehow are created from maggots in Ymir's flesh? So it's you're thinking about this, almost too rationally, talking about, in this sort of like, so-and-so begot so-and-so, and so-and-so begot so-and-so. These are not, at this time anyway, these are not little bearded men running around, causing mischief. The word dwarf here is actually, a better translation in this context is really something of more of like a medical term or an illness. So dwarves and elves, for example, were known to cause illnesses. So, for example, in German we have Hexenschuss. This is literally hexa, which is a hexa, that's a witch, and then a shot. So this Hexenschuss means like lower back pain. So you have a shooting pain, right? So that's an example of like how a witch can cause pain. But you also have things like Ulvablast or Ulvaeld in Swedish, where it's Ulvaeld is more like a skin rash caused by an elf. We also have I said Ulvablast, which is elf wind. And I do apologize for my viewers out there who speak Swedish. I don't speak Swedish, so sorry if that's a little off. In more archaic German, we have Alpschuss, which is literally an elf shot, and we have Alpstich, which is an elf stab, if you will. And we even have the modern German Albtraum, which is an elf dream. So my point real quick is that when I'm talking about a dwarf in this context, I'm talking about more of an illness that is caused by this sort of spirit and not some sort of legitimate little guy running around with a beard causing, like I said, causing all these problems. So the next thing that I want to talk about is the hole. You might, be wondering now, since we have already discussed that this hole was not used as a necklace to be worn around someone's neck because of the microscopic analyses that we read about earlier, then what was it used for? So admittedly, the evidence that I'm going to give you is from later folklore tradition. So again, I'm not trying to contradict myself as to what I just said about the dwarf, but I do have to look at later folkloric tradition for this, because this is the only explanation that I can really think of as to why the hole is there. So basically what would happen in these contexts, as we see in the Swedish black arts books, that we see that if you kill like a raven or a magpie and you take that raven's heart for instance, and you drill a hole through it, you can actually use that for hunting. Now, you might also ask, well, this is, what does this have to do with the context of the skull? Well, the way it's used in hunting is that you drill this hole and you look through it and you try to find the animal that you're trying to hunt, and the animal becomes sort of transfixed. It cannot move. So you have, quote unquote, conquered it, in a sense. You have trapped it. You see it right through the hole, and it's not going to move. So I'm going to go ahead and read you 2 passages from these black arts books so you see exactly what I'm talking about. First, shoot yourself a raven and take the heart out of him. Put a hole in it large enough so you can see through it. When you see some game, then only look through the heart. Then it will stand still as soon as you catch a glimpse of it, which is tested. The next one. Shoot a magpie on a Thursday evening after the sun has set. Take the heart out of it in the middle of the back, put a loading stock in right through the middle of it, and dry it. Now, when one wants to go near an animal, then one looks at it through the hole where the loading stock was put, then the animal won't see the shooter. So again, you have this idea of taking body parts, in this case obviously from another animal, and drilling a hole through it and looking through it and trying to transfix it, so you can capture it. That's very key to the very, I should say second to last word in this inscription. So the next lexeme that I want to talk about is unen. So as I had mentioned before, there are all kinds of other transliterations for this word. You even see, for example, the female dwarf concept that I had mentioned earlier, but it's not very likely and it seems rather forced. And in fact, if you look at the runes on the skull fragment, you'll see that they pretty much clearly read unen. So what does unen mean? It is just simply conquered. It is just a past participle, which means conquered. And if you look at the how it goes together within the context of the inscription, it's the dwarf that's being conquered. So if you think back to what I had just talked about concerning these folk tales, where you would drill a hole in the heart of a raven or drill the hole in the heart of a magpie to transfix the animal, so that way it stands still and you can shoot it and be successful in your hunt because you have found it, because you have conquered it. It's sort of something similar, which could be going on with the Ribe Skull fragment, where this healer is trying to find the dwarf through this hole to transfix it and conquer it. So real quickly, I want to go ahead and talk about these 3 names. We have Ulver, Odin, and Heitir, essentially Holtir. I believe that this is a divine triad of Odin. Now, it doesn't make sense to equate Ulver, which is wolf, to Fenrir. That has been compared in the past. I don't understand, given the entire context of the whole, I do not understand why you would need to equate that to Fenrir, and here's why. You have, they would say Fenrir, and then they would say Holtir is actually another name for Tyr, as in the god Tyr. So why would you have Tyr and Fenrir and Odin all on the same inscription when contextually this object is being used for healing purposes? It's an apotropaic function, right? So it doesn't quite make sense, because those of you who know the myths, you know that Fenrir and Tyr aren't exactly friends. So I believe, again, that this is a triad of Odin. Ulver, wolf, because Odin is, of course, associated with Fjeri and Freki. He is associated with wolves and ravens. Odin, of course, as in Odin. And then you have Holtir, or High Tyr, in which case, as we do know, Odin is called the High God. So it doesn't... It just makes more sense to do contextually. Again, this sort of triad could be argued all day, but for the sake of this video, we're going to go ahead and just look at it as the divine triad of Odin. So the last word that I want to go ahead and talk about is Bor. this is a strange one because it doesn't refer to board. It doesn't, like, bore as in a hole. There may be people out there who say it actually does refer to that. However, I cannot account for the U in the word B-U-U-R, especially if we look at the word bori earlier to mean bore, to mean by means of the hole, as in H-O-L-E. And the reason why I can't account for these two vowels is because it's never doubled like this throughout the inscription within a word. So it's very important that I stress that, because there are runes that are doubled, but they are like word boundaries where those are doubled. Those other runes are not actually doubled within like the roots of a word. And so that being said, just simply put, I believe that the B-U-U-R, Bur, is just a reference to the rune master, as in like he wrote those runes or he performed that work or something like that. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and give you the normalized inscription, and then I will go ahead and give you my translation and provide you with a sort of overview again of how we came to those conclusions. Over, elk orden, elk hoortje, geld glorious wieder, time werki, elk werk unen, boor. Wolf and Odin in high tier help against this act by means of the hole, and the dwarf is conquered. Thor wrote these runes. So we have Wolf for over, which I had mentioned earlier that I do believe is just a part of a hypostasis for Odin, and then we have Odin appearing, and then we have high tier, which again is an easy connection for Odin to be the high god. So again, that sort of triad. And then we have help or help against this act by means of the whole. That's the B-U-R-E, by means of the whole. And the dwarf, or in other words, the ailment, right? The illness is conquered. For the rune master wrote these runes.